I'm 66 years old, a widow, and for most of my life, I thought I understood what family meant. I lost my husband years ago, and since then, my whole world has revolved around my son and his family. I never imagined that one evening at a simple family dinner would change everything I thought I knew about my role in their lives. We were all gathered around the table, the kind of night that should feel warm and ordinary. My son, his wife, the kids, all of us together. And then, just like that, they shared their big news. They were expecting another baby, their 5th child. Everyone else at the table clapped and smiled. The kids giggled in excitement, and on the surface, it should have been a moment of pure joy. But inside me, something sank. It was as though the air had been pulled out of the room. I smiled. Of course I did. But behind that smile was a weight I couldn't ignore, because this wasn't just about welcoming a new grandchild. For me, it meant something else entirely. More laundry, more meals, more late nights and early mornings, more years of my life given over without question. I knew what was coming before anyone even said it. I had been here before. The quiet assumption that I would be the one to carry the extra load, to hold everything together while they grew their family. And in that moment, while everyone else was celebrating, I felt my chest tighten with the realization that my life, the little pieces of it I thought I still owned, might never really be mine again. I told myself not to make a scene, not to show the unease brewing inside me. After all, I love my grandchildren more than anything, but love doesn't erase exhaustion, and it doesn't erase the feeling of being trapped in a cycle of endless sacrifice. That night, I went to bed with a smile still plastered on my face, but in the quiet darkness, I felt the truth pressing down on me. My life had been slipping further and further away with every baby announcement, every unspoken expectation. And that's where my story truly begins, because the years that followed would test the very limits of how much one person can give before losing themselves completely. When I look back, I sometimes wonder when my own life quietly slipped out of my hands. It didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, in tiny, invisible ways, until one day I woke up and realized that every hour, every ounce of my energy belonged to everyone but me. It started with school mornings. I'd be the one knocking on bedroom doors, coaxing sleepy kids out of bed, braiding hair while eggs sizzled on the stove. Lunchboxes lined the counter, each needing sandwiches, fruit, and snacks packed just so. By 7:30, we'd be tumbling out the door, my car filled with chatter, complaints about homework and last-minute permission slips. Afternoons were a blur of homework checks, piano practice, scraped knees, and baseball gear left scattered across the living room. Evenings ended with lullabies, stories read under dim lamplight, and the soft weight of little heads resting against my shoulder. I loved those moments, their trust, their laughter, their tiny victories. I wouldn't trade them for anything. But the truth was, those moments came at a cost. While I poured myself into their lives, my own life grew smaller. The quilting circle I once loved kept meeting without me. The walking club at the park carried on while my shoes gathered dust. A stack of novels sat untouched on my nightstand, their pages waiting for a reader who never had the time. I had once dreamed of traveling, of seeing the mountains or the ocean again. Instead, my days became measured by school calendars, doctor appointments, and piles of laundry. I kept telling myself it was only temporary, that my son and his wife just needed a little help until they got back on their feet. But months blurred into years, and the rhythm became permanent. My back ached. My hands stiffened. But I pushed forward because the children needed me. I told myself love was enough to fill the gaps where my own life had vanished. Still, in the quiet moments late at night when the house finally settled, I would feel it. That dull ache of something missing. The question of who I was, apart from being the one who kept everything running. And just when I thought this endless cycle was all my life would ever be, the ground shifted beneath me. What came next wasn't gratitude or even recognition. It was something I never saw coming, something that would make me question everything I had given and everything I had lost. That Sunday evening, I walked into my son's home with a small flicker of hope in my chest. The table was set more carefully than usual, roast chicken steaming on a platter, green beans glistening with butter, a store-bought cake waiting on the counter. For a moment, I let myself believe this was a rare gesture of gratitude, a quiet thank you for the years I had given. The children filled the room with their usual noise giggles, spilled juice, Mason tapping his fork against the plate, little Emma nearly toppling her chair as she laughed at her brother's jokes. I smiled through it all, tired but proud. After all, I had been there for every spelling bee, every scraped knee, every tear-filled bedtime. It warmed me to think maybe tonight they wanted to acknowledge that. But then, I saw it. That exchanged glance between my son and his wife. The kind of look couples give each other when they're about to share big news. My son tapped his glass like he was about to make a toast, and my stomach tightened. The words came out glowing, triumphant. There was another baby on the way. Baby number 5. The kids squealed with excitement, asking if it would be a boy or a girl. Their mother's hand rested proudly on her stomach. My son grinned as if he'd just won a prize. And me, I kept my smile fixed. But inside, I felt myself sinking. A 5th child. Another round of diapers. Sleepless nights. Endless years of responsibility. Except this time, the weight pressed down even harder, because I knew exactly what it meant they would lean on me more than ever. As if that weren't enough. The night didn't end with the announcement. Later, after the children scattered, they sat me down at the table again, their voices calm, almost rehearsed. They said it was time to make things official. I was already there most of the week. The kids depended on me. Maybe, they suggested, I should take over the school runs, the meals, the laundry formally. And then came the part that stole my breath. They wanted me to help with rent and groceries, just a few $100s a month, since I used the space and ate meals there anyway. For a moment, the room spun. My pension barely covered my own little house, my utilities, my medication. I had already been slipping new shoes into their closets, covering field trip costs, quietly filling their pantry when it ran low. And now, after 10 years of giving, they wanted more. They wanted money. I sat there in silence, trying to keep my voice steady, though inside I was screaming. Was this what my love had become an expectation? A bill to be paid. The word fair echoed in my head, cutting deep. Fair. Was it fair that my hands were raw from dishes, my back sore from lifting, my years slipping through the cracks of their needs? That night, as I drove back to my own small house, something inside me shifted. I could no longer pretend this was just love. It had become a burden, a cage I had built with my own devotion. And deep in my chest, a thought began to take root. Something had to change. Day after day blurred into the same exhausting cycle. I would wake before sunrise to a buzzing phone, race across town to corral children out of bed, pack lunches, find missing shoes, braid messy hair. By noon, I had already washed dishes twice, sorted piles of laundry taller than me, and swept up crumbs that never seemed to end. At night, I tucked them into bed, soothed tantrums, and cleaned up the trail of chaos they left behind. The house grew calm, but inside me, I felt hollowed out. It was as if my life had been swallowed whole, leaving no space for my own breath. One evening, as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed my neighbor sitting on her porch swing, sipping iced tea. She waved me over. The moment I sat down, it was as though a dam had cracked. Everything spilled out: the never-ending chores, the fifth pregnancy announcement, the request for rent money that had cut me deeper than I wanted to admit. My voice shook as I confessed how invisible I felt, how much of myself I had lost. She listened in silence, and then she said something simple that pierced through all my fog. She reminded me that I had already raised my children, that it wasn't my job to keep carrying everyone else's life on my back. Those words echoed in me like a bell. I had whispered them to myself before, but hearing them spoken aloud made them undeniable. A few days later, I drove to the public library. I told my son I had errands, but really, I just needed space to breathe. I sat at a computer and typed senior apartments near me. Dozens of listings popped up, most too expensive, but tucked in between were a few income-based options. I scribbled down numbers and addresses in a notebook. It felt almost reckless, daring to imagine a place of my own, but it also felt like planting a seed. Before leaving, I stopped by the bulletin board near the entrance. Flyers for part-time work covered the court cashier shifts at the grocery store, desk aide at the senior center, tutoring for kids after school. None promised much, but even a few $100 extra could tip the balance. For the first time in years, instead of calculating how to stretch my savings for someone else, I allowed myself to picture a life for me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, pen in hand, sketching out numbers, whispering to myself that maybe, just maybe, freedom was possible. It was a fragile hope, but it was mine. And though I didn't know it yet, the road ahead would test that hope in ways I could never have imagined. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that should have passed without notice. I was folding laundry in the living room when my son's voice cut through the air, sharp and accusing. He said money had gone missing, $300, and that all signs pointed to me. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. I stared at him, waiting for a smile, some sign this was a cruel joke. But there was no laughter in his eyes, only suspicion. The words stung deeper than any wound I had ever known. After years of cooking meals, cleaning up after children, giving up my sleep, my hobbies, my savings, suddenly I was not a mother, not a caregiver, but a thief in their eyes. My chest tightened as shame and disbelief washed over me. I felt stripped bare, as though all my sacrifices had been erased in an instant. I tried to steady myself, to remind them of the trust we once shared. But inside, I was breaking. I remembered every night I had stayed awake to comfort a crying child. Every dollar I had quietly handed over when bills piled too high. Every dream I had set aside to hold their world together. And yet, here I stood, accused of stealing from the very family I had carried on my back. The room blurred until a small voice cut through the chaos. My granddaughter, brave beyond her years, stepped forward. She admitted she had seen her mother tuck that very money into her purse earlier that week. Her words were hesitant but steady, like a candle flickering in the dark. In that moment, the weight lifted, but not in relief, more like the crushing certainty that something inside me had finally snapped. The truth was out. I was innocent. But innocence didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that my son, my own flesh and blood, had looked at me and believed the worst. That wound ran deeper than any apology could ever heal. As I sat alone in my room later that night, the humiliation still burned in my chest. Yet beneath the pain was a clarity I had never felt before. I realized I could no longer live like this, trapped in a house where my love was mistaken for obligation, where my loyalty was rewarded with accusations. Something had broken, and there was no going back. I folded the last of the laundry and placed it neatly in the drawer. Not as a duty, but as a quiet farewell. In my heart, the decision was made. I would not stay in a home that treated me as less than human. The time had come to choose myself, even if it meant walking away from everything I had built for them. The day I turned the key to my own apartment, I felt both terrified and free. The place was small, just 2 rooms with worn carpet and walls that needed a fresh coat of paint. But it was mine. For the first time in years, every corner carried only my presence. No toys scattered across the floor. No constant clatter of dishes waiting in the sink. The silence was unfamiliar, but it felt like a soft blanket wrapping around me. I unpacked slowly, choosing each belonging with care. A faded quilt from my younger years draped across the bed. A second-hand lamp cast a warm glow in the evenings. On the windowsill, I placed a small plant, a symbol of growth that was finally mine to nurture. These were modest things, but each carried meaning. They marked the beginning of a life I thought I had lost long ago. At first, guilt lingered like a shadow. I caught myself wondering who was cooking dinner for the children, who was helping with homework. But as I settled into my routines, that guilt softened. I discovered the joy of making coffee just for myself, of reading a book without interruption, of listening to the radio while humming along. I began to sketch again, something I hadn't touched in over a decade. My hands felt clumsy at first, but soon the pencil moved with a rhythm that reminded me of the girl I once was. I found part-time work at a local shop, nothing glamorous, but it gave me purpose and a sense of pride. On weekends, I met an old friend for walks in the park. Laughter, which had felt like a forgotten language, returned to me in small bursts. Evenings no longer ended in exhaustion, but in quiet reflection. I realized solitude didn't mean loneliness. It meant freedom. And slowly, I learned to love it. Choosing myself hadn't been selfish. It was survival. For too long, I had given until there was nothing left. Now, as I sat by the window watching the city lights, I knew I had made the only choice that kept me alive inside. My heart was lighter, but I also sensed that life wasn't done testing me. The phone rang late in the evening, just as I was settling into the comfort of my little apartment. I saw my son's name on the screen, and my chest tightened. I knew, even before answering, that it wasn't going to be a simple call. His voice trembled as he explained that his wife was having complications with the pregnancy. He needed me. The children needed me. For a moment, I froze. Old instincts rushed in, drop everything, step back into the role I had carried for so long. But then another voice inside me whispered, steady and clear, you cannot lose yourself again. My hands trembled as I held the phone, listening to his words. Love for my grandchildren pulled at me like a tide, while the memory of exhaustion and betrayal burned like a scar. I sat there in silence after the call, caught between guilt and clarity. I thought about the years I had given, the endless nights, the accusations, the loneliness, and I thought about my new life, the apartment, the laughter of friends, the small joys of choosing for myself. Was I willing to surrender all of that again? The answer came slowly but firmly. I could help, but only on my terms. I would care for the children during emergencies, but I would not move back into their house. I would not give up my income, my time, or the fragile peace I had built. This time, I would draw the line. When I told my son, my voice didn't shake. For the first time, I spoke from a place of calm determination, not fear. I offered my help in ways I knew I could handle: short visits, a few nights if truly necessary. But I made it clear that my life was no longer theirs to control. It wasn't easy. The tension in his silence was sharp, but I didn't waver. I realized that boundaries were not a lack of love. They were the only way I could keep loving without disappearing. That night, I lay in bed with my heart racing, not from fear, but from strength. I had faced the test. I had always dreaded the pull back into sacrifice, and I had chosen differently. I had proven to myself that I could still care without surrendering who I am. For the first time in years, I felt not just free, but whole. When I look back now, it feels almost impossible to believe how much of my life I gave away without even realizing it. For years, I thought sacrifice was the only way to prove love. I thought silence was the only way to keep peace. And yet, all that silence nearly erased me. Today, my life feels different, lighter. There's still the weight of memory. Of course, the nights of exhaustion, the sting of betrayal, the ache of being accused of something I never did. But alongside those memories lives something far stronger: peace. I wake up in the morning in a home that is mine, surrounded by choices that belong only to me. For the first time in decades, I don't feel like I'm disappearing. I feel alive. The greatest lesson I've learned is this: choosing yourself is not selfish. It's survival. It's dignity. Boundaries do not mean a lack of love. They mean you love yourself enough to stay whole while caring for others. Without them, love turns into chains. With them, love can breathe. I share this not because my story is extraordinary, but because I know many of you carry similar weights. Maybe it's your family, your work, or your relationships. Maybe you've been told over and over that your worth is measured only in how much you give. But I want you to hear this clearly: your life matters too. Your needs matter, and it is never too late to choose yourself. If my story touched you, I hope you'll take a moment to reflect on your own. Have you ever felt torn between love and your own survival? Share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear your story. And if you believe others might need to hear this, please like and share this video. Together, maybe we can remind each other that caring for ourselves is the first step in caring for the people we love.